Thank you. Today's session, as we stated, is in reference to Windows security settings. Securing data for our clients is an essential part for us as IT professionals. We need to understand when using Windows, there is different types of access and sharing permissions for drives, files, and folders that can be granted to ensure that the information remains secure. As we learned, there is the least privilege method. In this session, we're going to learn about the different types of access, define and understand what NTFS is, New Technology File System, and the permission that it offers. Ensure that we're able to hopefully compare and contrast the various NTFS file permissions and describe what is SSO, Bitlocker, and EFS, where we discussed that single sign-on, as we learned, is a feature that's available to facilitate the process of only using one password to be able to get into multiple systems. Obviously, Windows and everybody else knows that no matter how hard we tried, if we created that they had 500 different IDs and different passwords, still people were either using the exact same password, or worse, they were actually putting it on the keyboard or a post-it note somewhere just to be able to remember what is the latest and greatest password to that given ID. Therefore, SSO resolved that issue so that it was one centralized location, and hopefully if it met the actual group policy settings when it came to the actual password and obviously security, it helped out. Now there is obviously some within Windows different types of users. Within Windows, you have your administrative group, you have your guests, you have your power users, backup users, administrators. Well, I already said administrators, but there's a plethora of them, and you can create your own groups yourself. Each one has its own access and capabilities to be able to obviously facilitate the process. And a lot of these Fortune 500s, a lot of the times you would create maybe by buckets of department, or maybe even department and let's say regular users, staff users within that department, just to be able to give a little bit more accurate description to each person's capability. We never gave the person or the user direct access, as we're going to learn. Within the NTFS file system itself, it gave us the capability to be able to store and retrieve information with setting the security to the drives. No longer can you just go crazy willy-nilly into these things. You can actually set your read, your write, your read and execute. You could actually set your own special permissions. We should never, ever, ever give full control, unless if it is to the user's actual profile themselves. And as I stated, SSO reduces what we consider the password fatigue, and hopefully reduces the cost to IT, since God only knows when one password changed, everybody forgot what the other password was to all the other systems. So then there goes a big humongous ball where they're just changing all their passwords and going crazy. Overall, what do we have to lean on when it comes to these things? We have our personal responsibility and adaptability. Personal responsibility when it comes to these things. Once again, a lot of these things that are going to come into us, we are fully responsible ensuring that we put these people in the proper groups. We are also responsible for giving the proper support to give them, what was it? What type of privilege should I give? That's considered just sufficient for them to do their job. Least privilege method. Do not open up the thing. Is sufficient enough that Windows is completely open. God only knows why. We want to be able to at least help out with these actual IDs. I know everybody may not understand what I mean, but Windows is backwards. You lock everything compared to Linux. Everything's locked to be able to unlock everything. It's the other way around. questions or doubts? So we need to be able to lean on this behavioral skill, as we need to be able to adapt to every given situation. We've learned plenty of OSs out there with the NTFS. We also know that there's x64. There is the later operating systems between Windows 7 all the way up to Windows 10 that we need to be able to adapt given on the situation. And we should not become frustrated. We need to be able to listen and understand to the given situation to be able to analyze the actual issue. If a person is not personally responsible for what they are doing and try to blame someone else, that is one quick way of getting fired. And as I said, we are always to blame. Even if we are not the person that did it, we apologize. We are in Disney. Not sure if I ever told you that. Congratulations, you've just been hired by Disney. You are support. You have yet to understand that until the day that someone frustrates you and is yelling at the top of their lungs, and you have to go through the 9 steps of dealing with that person's actual outrage, which had nothing to do with you. So remember, you need to resist. Do not blame Bobby just because Bobby did something wrong. We just apologize for that experience and move forward, and hopefully calm down that outrage customer. Even. I think that's as much as I can blab on. I think they're about to take the baton away from my hand. Oops, sorry, Don. Just for that, I clicked it twice. I pass it on to my fellow TA.
All right. We are definitely going to need to distinguish between the different types of accounts that you're going to use within the system and how they kind of distinguish themselves within it. And you have different types. You have group accounts, then you have user accounts. Typically, you want your group accounts to come first. You want to develop these in an enterprise setting before you start developing the individual user accounts. For example, if you develop a user account without putting it into a group, and you give them all these specific permissions that they need to fulfill their day-to-day tasks, if they're in marketing, well, later on, say they get a lateral promotion to move over to HR. Now you have to go in individually, turn off all those user settings that they don't need, and then grant them access and authorization to all the settings they do need. You don't want to do this every single time somebody in the company gets transferred to another department, moves up, or what have you, because it will chew up a lot of your time. So in order to avoid this, we would create groups. So you would have a group for HR, you would have a group for marketing, you would have a group for sales, group for operations, programmers, developers. Each of these departments would have their own individual groups, and you would set all the authorization and permissions that they need to be able to perform their tasks on a regular basis. And then when the time comes that somebody gets a lateral move or a promotion into another division, all you have to do is remove them from one group and put them in another group. All that stuff automatically changes for them. And you don't have to worry about missing something, like forgetting to give them an authorization they need or forgetting to take something away that they shouldn't have any longer. And the main types of groups you have are your highest level, which would be your administrative level groups. Then right below them would be your power users, and then your regular users, and then your guests. Those are the 4 main Windows groups that you would employ. Any questions so far with regards to this? Nope. All right. First one, administrative group. That is essentially the highest level you can have within the system. They pretty much have authorization to do anything. They have keys to the castle. They can add anything, delete anything, move anything around that they need to do. And basically within the the system domain, they have the ultimate authority to accomplish whatever they need to do. This is a great thing. That's something you would hand out very, very sparingly. And even so, when you do, the people who would be using this as system administrators and stuff like that would not typically operate in the administrative level account at all times, because the longer you're utilizing it, the greater risk there is of somebody gaining access to it. So typically you would have a power user account or another user account to perform as many of the functions that you possibly can, and then only sign in and utilize an administrative level account to do specific things. And then as soon as you're done, as soon as you've completed those tasks, then you would back out of that administrative level user account and go back to your other normal account. And again, only come back to the administrative level when you absolutely necessary. Now, power users. Now, they're not quite as strong as an administrative level account. You do have a lot of elevated privileges, like allowing to install software and things of that nature. Typically, this would be your regular IT on its normal basis would operate as a power user. Junior administrators, programmers, developers, people who would need on a normal basis to have some elevated privileges, but don't necessarily need to have full administrative access. Any questions with regards to administrator group or power users? Okay. All right. The other two, standard user. This is going to be your general operations, your HR people, accounting, sales, all that. They would have basically a set level of permissions that they would, be allowed. They would, not be able to install software typically. Typically, you would assign to them in the group, they have access to certain file systems or servers or whatever they need to do their day-to-day tasks. These would be the frontline employees typically, and or supervisors. And you would have them broken down into normal groups, but they would not typically have any types of elevated privileges to go along with them. Lastly, you have guests. And for the most part, typically you would want this disabled on almost any system you have. You do not want somebody having basic level access as a guest on your system. And this is typically something you would turn off. If you're going to have, say, like an intern come in or a contractor come in for a few weeks, or a visitor from another office who's going to be kind of like a salesman who's coming to your region, and they're just going to kind of use your office for like a week or so, you're not going to give them a guest account. You're going to set up a temporary account, which would be a standard user, and typically set that up so that, if it's like an intern and they're only going to be with you for a semester, after that semester, you would set that, like if they're going to be there for 3 months, you set that account to expire in 3.5 months or something along those lines, but not set them up as a guest. You want to be very tight on the controls on what file systems you allow them access to. You don't want them being able to, upload any software or anything like that, but you also want them to be able to have the level of access that they need to accomplish the tasks that they are being brought in for. Any questions with regards to a standard user or a guest account? All right. Configuring users and groups. Every version of Windows includes typically 1 or 2 in the group management tools. Typically within the control panel, as we know and we've repeated, they tend to move that control panel with every single iteration that comes out. And it's under usually the applet user accounts. And then within there, you can go to utility, local users, and groups. All right. User account control. Let's see. Faison, can you please read for me, sir?
User account control. User account control UAC is intended to prevent unintentional or unauthorized changes to the computer by either promoting or prompting for permission to continue or requiring the administrator password before continuing. User account control was introduced in Vista and works for both standard user and administrator accounts. To make user account control less aggressive, Microsoft introduced 4 UAC levels in Windows 7. Always notify me only when programs try to make changes to my PC, notify me only when programs try to make changes to my computer, do not dim my desktop, and never notify.
Excellent, thank you. I'm sure at some point many of us have played around with this tool. I know I have when I was initially working with Windows, and at first you're like, you know what, I want a lot of security on this. It's kind of like when you first start playing around with firewalls, you set it to maximum security and be like, all right, my system's protected, I'm good to go. And then you realize pretty quickly how annoying that is, that every single time your computer tries to do something, it's asking you for permission to do it. And you start getting pinged multiple times a minute, or every 30 minutes or so, especially like with the UAC or the firewall, like, hey, this program's trying to connect to the internet, this program's trying to connect to the internet, this program is trying to do this within your system, and it starts to get annoying. And then usually the next step somebody does, if they're not familiar with computers, is immediately turn everything to never notify me. I don't want to deal with security anymore. I'm just going to go about my day, use the programs I normally use, and move on with my life. I thought I wanted better security. I must be wrong. I've done good so far. There is very great risk in setting this up to never notify and turning this off on your systems. You definitely want to have this established, especially on the user accounts. You do not necessarily, you want them to have administrative authorization before they start downloading programs or any of that stuff, unless they are a developer or programmer or something along those lines, where they would be a power user. But for standard users, you definitely don't want them just downloading, hey, we got this interesting meme that you should look at, click the hyperlink below, something along those lines. You don't typically want your standard users having that level of access, so you want that alert to pop up. You don't want it happening for every little thing, but you at least want it for any kinds of installs, and especially on programs that are trying to make changes to the actual system. Any questions with regards to the UAC? All right. Parental controls. These are a lot of fun. Typically won't see these set up on enterprise machines. This will typically be in household computers, although they will have something similar in the enterprise environment where they won't let you look at certain types of material. They'll have a content filter in place within most offices. But parental controls, you can set it on a lot of them. You can set the age of the child, and they will only allow that child to view websites or materials that are appropriate for that age, as long as there is an ESRB rating attached to it or an age restriction attached to it. They will block all that material. If you are a parent, or you have young kids around, definitely something that you want to set up ahead of time, because when I was a kid, parental controls were first starting to come out for TVs, and my sister and I figured it out before our parents, and we immediately went in and put parental control locks on C-SPAN, ESPN, QVC, any of the TV channels that they liked, because they got that TV to try to block the stuff we wanted to watch. So we just made a point to figure it out before they did and lock them out. So at least go in, set it up so the password is there and only you have access to it at the bare minimum if you're not going to turn it on. Any questions with regards to parental control? All right. And with that, I believe I am handing over to Marvin for NTFS.
All right. Chris, if you don't mind, sir.
NTFS overview and description. New Technology File System, NTFS, was introduced with Windows NT to handle growing disk sizes, security concerns, and the need for more stability. With NTFS, files, directories, and volumes can each have their own security. NTFS's security is flexible and built in. It's possible to convert from FAT32 to NTFS without losing data, but the operation in reverse is not possible.
I wouldn't understand the reason to go back anyway. Just as when I first learned that, I was like, well, why would I want to go back? But we're all about evolving, and as tech has become more of a major component of our lives, we of course will always want to make sure that we could secure it and keep it stable. So here lies NTFS. Appreciate it, Chris. In this area, we're going to talk about a couple of things, permissions being the bigger of those things, from different levels, file level, directory level. We got the SSO, which is very fun for certain people who don't want to keep up with a lot of different passwords. It has its usefulness. We talked about it earlier today. Bitlocker and EFS. Let's see here. Alvarez, we're going to get you to take care of 1 out of 3 permissions.
All right, NTFS permissions. Share permissions apply only when a user is accessing a file or folder through the network. Local permissions and attributes are used to protect a file when the user is local. NTFS permissions are able to protect at the file level, while share permissions can be applied to the directory level only. NTFS permissions can affect users logged on locally or across the network to the system where the NTFS permissions are applied. Share permissions are in effect only when the user connects to the resource via the network.
All right, so share permissions are the permissions you set on a folder, the folder that you're sharing. And if you think about it, MTS permissions are the actions that you can take on both that folder on a local and a network level. Just knowing that is enough. And we want to talk about some of the actual permissions, which would be more important, like the read, write, and things of that nature. So go ahead to the next one. Disregard the numbering. I see it's kind of off. This is 2 out of 3. David, if you don't mind, sir.
Let's see. Within NTFS, permissions for objects fall into one of 3 categories: allow, not allow, and deny. Permissions set at a folder are inherited down through subfolders unless otherwise changed. Cumulative if a user is a member of a group that has read permissions and a member of a group that has write permission, they effectively have both read and write permission.
Thank you, sir. So allow, not allow, and deny are those 3 categories, and inherited versus cumulative is a way to see how those permissions can be set. Like David just said, if you fall in a category where you have read and write, you have read and write. And those permissions are inherited from the main folder to its subfolders, unless it was broken through a change. So it stays the same throughout.
Got a question
Quick
from
question.
Chris real quick.
Go ahead.
What's the difference between not allow and deny?
Okay, so not allowing something in that folder doesn't totally deny you from using that altogether. It could just be one feature or one attribute within that folder, Chris. It's not the deny will be the full thing. So I want to give you an example. Let's see if I can find one really quickly. Let me pull up Is that me? Okay. Oh, that's not me. Hold that question, Chris. I'll have it up, or you can hang out. We'll get before we start back. So perfect timing, because let me do some research here.
Ice cream truck.
Yeah, ice cream truck. So we have 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
See you in a few. Can you stop it? I'm going to go to the next slide here. Let's see. This is a good one as well. Ronald, the last 3 are 3 for MTS permission.
All right. A copy of a file will generally have the permission assigned to it that are placed on newly created files in that folder, regardless of what permission were on the original file. A move file, on the other hand, will attempt to keep the same permission as it had in the original location. Folder copy and move operations follow similar guidelines to those files.
Thank you, sir. And I think this is kind of, I'm just going to reiterate it, but I think it moves pretty fluid in what it's saying. If you take a copy, if you have 2 folders, and if you take a copy out of folder A and place it in folder B, that copy becomes what that folder B is, if it had anything different than it was on folder A. So it absorbed the lifestyle of the folder B. But if you move it,
retains the permission of the source directory.
Right. If you move it though, if you move that file, it's going to keep all of its belongings. It's going to stay exactly how it was written. It doesn't change. So, and we tend to do that a lot, but it's not for let's say work-related moves. You have to understand that if you move a file, everything stays intact. If you copy that file, it will change.
So quick question, is Control X, Control V, is that a move or is that a paste or a copy?
That's a copy.
That's a cut, and that's just a cut. It's not really a move. Well, it's like a delete and paste of information, copy and
It generally
paste.
doesn't change the permissions unless you're cut and pasting it. For example, if you have a drive that's a fat drive, it'll lose all permissions.
A USB or something like that. It will
Yeah.
lose.
In a
it would
move
be
file,
just copy, yeah.
Go ahead and finish your thought, Joe. You muted yourself. That's the opposite of a hot mic. It's a cold mic. You're not going, okay.
Yourself, you okay? Hello?
You didn't finish your thought, Joe. I thought you was going to finish that one for me.
as far as I was just trying to articulate, because this gets really confusing when down the line when you start talking about different like NTFS versus FAT32 or whatever, copy and move in different scenarios. It can get confusing if people don't understand the difference between copy. The file retains the permissions that have been put on the folder in the source directory, as opposed to move, the file keeps the permissions that he has before he was moved to the source directory.
Now,
There's
what's even
differences
worse
there.
Now, what's even worse is my understanding this is only if it's inside the drive. In other words, if you move this to the server, it will not inherit.
Yeah, if you move across a network to a different system, I think that Diego is right. It doesn't retain. If you copy or move, it doesn't retain. If you X copy, on the other hand, it keeps everything. At least, I mean, I haven't done this in like more than a year, so I don't really, that's my best memory of it.
This is mainly in reference to the drive itself from one side to the other, what happens.
Actually, it's probably more correct Not correct, but it's more safe to assume if you robocopy it. And corporate, I think corporate people should, if you're moving files and stuff, you have so much more power if you learn to use the robocopy command.
Touche. Joseph, while you off mute, I'm going to let you wrap up this one for me.
All right, NTFS file permissions, full control. User has permissions to take ownership and change permissions. Read allows the user to view the contents of the file and to see ownership and attributes. Read and execute combines the read permission with the ability to execute. Write allows the user to overwrite the file as well as to change attributes and see ownerships and permissions. Modify combines the read and execute permission with the write permission and further allows the user to delete the file.
So the burning question should be, modify sounds very close to full control, right? But it's not the same. Anybody see what's not there?
Permissions.
Yeah, yeah. But what
Ownership.
part of? Go ahead, Chris.
Ownership.
You
The
cannot-
modify can delete it, but they can't own it.
That's it. That's
Oh.
it. So that's the glaring difference. But everything else is pretty much what you see: full control, read and execute, write, modify. So those are the permissions that are set on those files that we wanted to discuss. And you may be asked a question about modify, and they may try to house it as a full control, but it's not a full control. All right. This is a visual example of what you'll see on that particular file. As you can see down here where it says permissions for the system, you have full control, which if you have full control, it has everything checked. So if by any chance this guy only had read as an allow, all the rest of the check marks will be denied, with just read over on that side. So we wanted to kind of let you see how it looks as a visual. So if it was just read and execute, once again, you'll just have that check mark for allow, and the rest will be deny. Let's see here. Okay. A little more extended information here. Who haven't I called on? Camille, are you present, ma'am? If you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. All right, NTFS directory permissions. The first one is full control. The user has permission to take ownership of the directory or any of its content and change permission. Read allows the user to navigate the entire directory structure, view the contents of the directory, view the contents of any files in the directory, and see ownership and attributes. Read and execute combines the permissions of read with those of lists, folder contents, and adds the ability to run executables. Write allows the user to create new entities within the folder, as well as to change attributes. List folder allows the user to view the contents of a directory and to navigate to its subdirectories. And modify combines the read and execute permission with the write permission, and further allows the user to delete everything.
But not take ownership, like full control. So this is from a directory vantage point. And if you notice, everything pretty much stayed the same. Of course, we brought in list folder, but the permissions didn't change from file to directory. So
just to make sure I
Go ahead.
understand this. So the list folder, they can look at the files and the directories and the subdirectories, but they can't read them. They can't open anything. Is that right?
you can view the contents. You
So
can
what's
open
the
them.
difference between that and read?
Well, I think you're
But
lacking.
you can't open it. You can see what's
like the
in the
directory.
folder, but you won't be able to see at all the contents. If you try to open it, it will not allow you.
So it stays at the directory level is what you're saying,
Yes.
Diego.
Correct. You can only
Okay.
can see what's
I
in there.
apologize, David. But to answer your question now. Okay. All right. I think we're close to wrapping up. This is the same visual, but from a directory standpoint. So, and we can use David's example. So if they're only able to list folder contents, that will only be the one thing that's checked here, and everything else will be denied. And I don't know if you notice up top, this is group or username. So it depends on where you fall on that, what permissions will lie for you. So you can edit it and change it from there. But big picture here is understanding what's full control, what's modify, what's read, execute, write, and list folder contents. All right, single sign-on. Kareem, if you don't mind, sir.
Single sign-on. The purpose of a single sign-on SSL is to authenticate and give users access to all the application and systems they need when they log on. SSL is used by many environments, including Kerberos, Microsoft Active Directory, Novelty Directory, and some certificate model implications. There are many benefits to using a single sign-on feature. Reduces password fatigue and therefore helps retain security through complex passwords. Saves time re-entering authentication data. Reduces IT costs related to help desk tickets about passwords.
Thank you, sir. I have to say I have a lot of experience with single sign-on with my last employment environment with the radiologists. They had to open up PACS, which is the place where they view your images. But then there's other EMR dictation software, any other software that works in conjunction with PACS that they would use. It's like 5 or 6 things that will load up once they sign into that computer. And it does it seamlessly. You'll see Epic or Allstrips or whatever EMR company they have, PACS will pop up. Their dictation software will pop up, all by using the same sign-on. And the neat thing about it is if that login doesn't work, it stops everything. So if we made it as simple as that, if you can remember that one login, you have all of your tools to work. And it was day and night when they had to sign in other things. We would go into the offices, and a pet peeve, I talked to Kelly about it earlier. One of the pet peeves is that when they didn't want to remember something, they'll write it down. And it's not uncommon to see a password and a username taped to the top of a monitor or up under a mouse pad. So, and that's, that's not good. So although they were in a locked room, that's not appropriate. I'm pretty sure that kind of goes against a lot of acceptable use policies that we had in place, but you kind of catered to the physicians at times, but this made it easier on them. So we didn't have to answer questions about passwords for quite a while once they got their single sign-on. Any questions about single sign-on? And it takes more than one person to be involved in that process. If you had to do an image of a system, we will have to get other teams involved that uses the other software so it could talk to ours. So it was a process, but it's got it down to a science. You knew who to call first, second, third to get everything to work. Bitlocker, Faison.
Bitlocker. Bitlocker is the whole drive encryption tool that can also seal a device such that it will not boot if any system files are altered. It can also lock the drive to a particular machine, preventing stealing the drive and connecting to another device. BitLocker to Go provides the same encryption technology to help prevent unauthorized access to the files stored on the removable drives.
Thank you, sir. So NTFS is encryption on the file level. BitLocker is the encryption on the drive level. And anybody can understand the importance of not being able to utilize a hard drive that was taken from one computer and placed into another. Like, to be totally honest, that's significant, because push come to shove, if they couldn't get that to load up on your personal PC or wherever they located, if they could just remove it and then use a external hard drive type setup and try to navigate it that way, it's as simple as making it a slave and plugging it up and utilizing some of the tools to try to access it like that. So to prevent it from doing that, even in that option, is pretty significant. And we talked about, what's the word I'm looking for? We talked about shutting down USB ports on computers in enterprise settings, a way to allow certain users to have access to USB drives. They would put, it's called like an ironclad, or they would already have a built-in encryption. So we had, and I love to be able to pull from real situations. I worked with the orthopedic doctor, and he did hip replacements, knees, shoulders, he did it all. But he had his rep, who was a striker rep, he would come in and he would have his jump drive. Like, my jump drive wouldn't even work in the computer, but he was like, hey, Marvin, let me get on your computer for a second. I need to download images of patient A so I can use my measurement software to order and customize the correct prosthetics for the surgery. So he would pop his jump drive in, and lo and behold, it recognized it, but he had to put in a password. And once he was able to get in, he was able to pull up the software and utilize that process of accessing those images, loading into his measurement software, and order the prosthesis for the surgery the next day or days to go. So that was a way for him to bypass our, I'm pretty sure with permissions, our lockdown of our USB ports on our PCs. So when I had to do it for show and tell, anonymizing images for students that I was training when they wanted to show like really gross or exciting images that you don't see often, to take off the people's name and make it anonymized, that was another way we could do that for them. So that was pretty neat. All right, who we got? Who's on the clock? Kimberly.
EFS encrypting file system is an encryption tool built into Windows Vista Business, Enterprise, and Ultimate, Windows 7, Windows 8, 8.1 Professional, Enterprise, Windows 10 Professional, Enterprise, and Education. It allows a user to encrypt files that can be decrypted only by the user who encrypts the files. It can be used only on NTFS volumes, but is simple to use.
Thank you, ma'am. Has anyone ever done this? Speak out if you have. Kelly, have you?
Yeah, I've used DFS. It was a while ago, but yes.
Okay. I haven't had any personal experience with it, but I wanted one of you guys to speak on it because if you had personal experience, you could.
I think that's, I think I've done this. I think that's what you do when you encrypt a USB. I mean, part of what you can do with this is encrypting a USB drive in a domain environment. I think it uses that.
EFS.
I've never used it to do a USB drive. I think they do BitLocker to go for that. But I mean, I've done it for individual files. Yeah.
So where did that file go and where did it end up, Kelly? I guess that's what I'm getting at.
It was within a shared drive system we had at my when I was in operations.
Okay.
We would encrypt certain customer files and stuff like that.
So only that customer can see it, or only someone else that's working alongside you have access to it?
Only the salespeople assigned to that account and the operations personnel working on that account would have access.
Okay.
See, what happens is basically the file is always encrypted compared to BitLocker. This file is always encrypted unless you open it. And you must have rights to open it. The moment you try to open it, it will decrypt it and now open it. Compared to BitLocker, on boot, it will decrypt the drive, the entire drive.
Okay. Well, you have EFS, another encryption tool. I think this is towards the end. We have some supplemental information that we're going to share. Since the test still currently has Windows 7, because Windows 7 was going for quite some time, so still has some Windows 7 information on it. This is good information to know. When you have accounts set up on Windows 7, understanding that the guest account is off by default, it's disabled by default. That's a question that I personally have seen, and that's something that we want you to retain and know for testing purposes. And it's good to have it turned off. You have to go in to actually access it. It's turned off standardly disabled. So you have
real world confirm that it's turned off.
Right. So know that you have admin, you have the regular user, and then you have guest that is, like I said, is by default not on.
Make sure it is off.
Off. Make sure it is off. Yes. Make sure it's off. Yes. All right. With Windows 8, they wanted to show you how Windows accounts look there. So it's same as Windows 7, but you also add in the child account, which was not there. So you really won't see a lot of 8 outside of how it looks, but it's just also some information here. So I'm trying to recall any question that was besides gadgets, widgets, charms, or Metro that came up, and it wasn't. People kind of like trying to forget. I think even the test people want to forget about Windows 8. And Windows 10 Home Edition. You can add someone to your family or set them up separately. We've probably all done this, but this is how it looks. I guess it's for Mac people who don't see Windows 10 a lot.
Is they now put in the features of being able to sync with your actual OneDrive account or whatever account you have with Microsoft. And you have the capability of creating local accounts. That means you can't reset the password. Here, I can go log on somewhere on the internet and reset the password of my account. Over here, if I forgot, unless if I put something that allows me, right? It's not going to allow me. Only the administrator will be able to. And if you forgot what was the administrative account, boom, you're locked out. Unless if you have some other little tools that I can play with. Linux based.
We all don't have those tools. We can unshare for a second.
So we said it was a Windows 7 standard administration. No questions, concerns, any of them? Right. Hopefully by now, we should be able to define the different types of user accounts, describe the NTFS and how it tends to address the security threats compared to the old FAT32, compare and contrast the various NTFS directory and file permissions, and hopefully be able to describe what SSO, Bitlocker, and EFS is. Anyone have a question in reference to single sign-on or NTFS? Everybody okay? Feel warm and cozy?